Hi, welcome back to Cubs and Culture for February 7th, 2018. Continuing our exploration of Midnight Cowboy, switching over to the films. Give me a sec. Okay, so the French New Wave is a collection of loosely collected a set of films from the 50s and 60s with Godard being sort of the leading director, which is sort of defined by two different issues in terms of like subject matter or in scene stuff. They're very concerned with like realism, so contemporary social life, lower economic classes, etc. Complicated, messy humanity. They were often very, very cheaply produced. Sometimes where they would use like shopping carts for dollies and stuff, and then a lot of location shooting, and sort of in terms. And the other thing which the French New Wave did is a lot of scenes or individual shots were very, very long. Long takes where they would just let the camera play. So so on one hand you had that sort of gritty realism in scene, but in terms of sort of the overall narrative, it's the French New Wave started to push narratives to have them fractured or broken. So I forget which film it is, but there's a very famous one of Godard's films. Is this absolutely long take where he liked the take so much, but it was too long. It was like 8 minutes or something. So he took out 3 minutes. Not randomly. He took out 3 minutes in the middle of the take and then slammed it together. So you had cuts in the scene where they would jump. It's a jump cut basically, where it just moved forward in the scene, and so you end up missing. Scenes like that. Or you get sort of disassociation, flights of fancy with characters. Not even in scene missing, as you end up getting not just like beats and scenes missing, but you get entire scenes missing, and so you start getting with narratives playing around with sort of perspective and time. So yeah, on the one hand, the French New Wave films are very, very they're anti-classical films, so they're very, very like gritty and realistic, cheaply produced, and a lot of location shooting on the one hand, and on the other hand, they have their narratives are often fractured a lot more. Like you don't necessarily like characters arc, and so it's that sort of collection of films. Excuse me, Midnight Cowboy isn't really a French New Wave film, but Schlesinger, who does a really good job handling this material, is clearly was immersed in that stuff. So like some of the like most of the film is shot on the streets of New York. There, and then sort of the other, and like the only major thing they sort of filmed and on set is the stuff in Ratso's apartment, which they actually moved moved a flat from New York City into a studio. And then he does use Schlesinger does use long takes, the way in which Joe's disassociations, he plays around with color and lighting. So it's a very sort of French New Wavy film. And I really, really like this stuff. I sort of like the contrast between sort of the realism of in-scene stuff and the sort of unreality of sort of the overall effect of the narrative. So it's an incredibly well-directed film, but the other way in which it's well-directed is, oh my god, is this movie really well shot? Well, and the other sort of way in which it's really well directed is it's very uncompromising, and I like one of the things that's really bizarre to me. and I think it's correct, is the way in which, and this is, by the way, this is really weird, given that it's John Voight, but the way in which um, Joe at times is treated as a sex object, very similar to how a woman would be treated, how women have been treated in cinema for eons. And it's a little bit weird because it's John Voight, but he is very physically attractive in this film. So it's really uncompromised in that way. John Schlesinger at least had a lifelong male partner. I don't know if he identified as gay, but he was at least had a lifelong partner. Um, and so he was at least queer. And I think that really helps the movie because the way in which Joe has to be sort of, I don't think a straight director would have realized how important it was to understand sort of the way in which, Joe can be alienated because of his looks to without linger on them the same way like he should be given what the movie is trying to say. There should be times in which the camera treats him as a sexual object, and I don't know if a straight director would have necessarily realized that. The other sort of thing about this film as far as directing is, oh my fucking god, is it such a well acted film. A lot of people don't just looking around, a lot of people don't really remember that much of the plot, but they remember is Joe Buck and Ratso walking the streets of New York, and John Voight and Dustin Hoffman are really good in this film. I think you can argue that the career best performances, etc. Now, give me a moment. So at the end of the day, Schlesinger and Salt developed a really strong screenplay, which I think if it was shot traditionally would have been fine. But the fact that they pushed it into sort of this gritty, sort of new wavy stuff really makes the film very, very good. And the acting is amazing. John Voight as Joe Buck is the quintessential sort of naive country person who's get chewed up and spit out by the city, finally moving, and Hoffman as Ratso, sort of the quintessential New York guy who's living by his wits because of social conditions. And it really, at the end of the day, those two characters, even if you don't particularly like the movie or some of the other sort of things that might be problematic about this film, those two characters really do stand apart. And the relationship of this basically two characters at the fringe of society that at the end of the day all they have is each other is profoundly, deeply moving, because the way in which Schlesinger and Salt don't judge them negatively and really take their perspective and bring a messy, fractured humanity to them. And then two, Voight and Hoffman utterly respect and like their characters. And so they end up, so when Ratso dies and Joe at the end is cradling him, it's an absolutely gut-punching image and moment, because even though they're not really they're such flawed human beings, and you can even argue that their misery is somewhat self-imposed, because both of them at one point, Joe could have become a dishwasher, or Ratso could have been a boot black, but it doesn't work that way. Okay, so I want to spend an entire section talking about sort of queer content in this film, because as a queerish piece of cinema, and also the first best picture with explicit gay characters, I think it's important to talk about that onto itself. I just really adore this movie, sort of way in which it was filmed. It's very, very gritty and real, but on one level, on the other hand, it has flights of fancy, and the characters you get a total sense of them being sort of loser dreamers, and it's the film is not like the film is not pretty, but it's beautiful. If that makes any sense. Okay, I feel like I'm just gushing. See you in a moment.